The woman behind the counter at Riverside Gas Go had been invisible for 23 years, quietly pumping gas and ringing up sodas while hiding a secret that would have shocked every customer who ever looked through her like she didn't exist. But on the scorching Tuesday afternoon in July, when two F-22 Raptor pilots pulled up to Pump 7, everything Maria Santos had worked so hard to keep buried was about to surface in the most unexpected way. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand as she watched the digital numbers climb on Pump 7. At 49, she had the kind of weathered face that came from 2 decades of desert sun streaming through gas station windows and the weight of memories she never talked about. Her dark hair, streaked with premature silver, was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the same faded blue Riverside Gas Go polo shirt that had seen better days 3 years ago. To everyone who stopped at the station on Highway 14, just outside the Mojave Desert town of Lancaster, California, Maria was simply part of the landscape. The quiet woman who knew exactly how much gas you could afford, who never judged when someone counted out quarters for a pack of cigarettes, and who somehow always had the coffee fresh, even during the dead hours between midnight and dawn. She moved with an economy of motion that some might have attributed to years of working on her feet, but those who knew what to look for might have recognized something else entirely. The gas station itself was nothing special. A small rectangular building with 6 pumps, a repair bay that hadn't seen serious use in 5 years, and a convenience store that carried everything from energy drinks to motor oil. It sat on a stretch of highway that connected the sprawling suburbs of the Antelope Valley to Edwards Air Force Base, about 30 miles northeast. Military personnel were regular customers, though most barely acknowledged Maria beyond a nod or a mumbled thanks as they grabbed their change. What none of them knew was that Maria Santos had a very good reason for choosing this particular location 23 years ago. The proximity to Edwards wasn't coincidental. It was intentional, though not for the reasons anyone might have guessed. Maria's routine was as predictable as the desert sunrise. She arrived at 5:30 a.m. to relieve Jimmy, the night shift attendant, who spent most of his time reading paperback novels and watching for trouble that rarely came. She'd brew the first pot of coffee, check the pumps, and settle in behind the bulletproof glass partition that separated her from the world. Her lunch break was always at noon, when her nephew Danny would call from his apartment near UC Davis, where he was finishing his engineering degree, the degree Maria was paying for with every dollar she could spare from her modest salary. Danny Santos was the reason Maria had chosen this quiet life. When his parents, Maria's brother, Carlos and Elena, died in a car accident 15 years ago, 8-year-old Danny became her responsibility. She'd left everything behind to raise him, working double shifts and weekend jobs to make sure he had everything he needed. Now at 23, Danny was 6 months away from graduating with a degree in aerospace engineering, with dreams of working for NASA or one of the major defense contractors. He had no idea what his aunt had sacrificed to make those dreams possible. The irony wasn't lost on Maria that Danny wanted to work in aerospace, designing the very systems she had once operated in combat. But that was a conversation they'd never had, and one she hoped they'd never need to have. On this particular Tuesday, Maria was restocking the chip display when she heard the distinctive whine of high-performance engines pulling into the station. She glanced up to see a sleek black Mustang GT and a silver Camaro SS rolling toward the pumps. Both cars had the kind of aggressive modifications that screamed military, not the flashy chrome and neon of civilian street racers, but the subtle functional upgrades of people who understood real performance. 2 men climbed out of the cars, and Maria immediately recognized the type, even in their civilian clothes. Mid-30s, athletic builds maintained through disciplined fitness regimens and the kind of confident posture that came from operating multi-million-dollar aircraft at speeds that would terrify most people. Their conversation carried across the hot asphalt as they began fueling up. "Can't believe they're making us drive back to base," the taller one was saying, running a hand through his short brown hair. "My car's been sitting in that parking lot for 3 weeks." "At least your air conditioning works, Hawk," his companion replied, wiping sweat from his dark skin. "Phoenix has been running hot since Vegas." He patted the Camaro hood affectionately. Maria recognized the call signs immediately. In the military, especially among pilots, call signs were more than nicknames. They were identities, earned through training, combat, or memorable mistakes that followed you for life. These two were clearly Air Force, probably stationed at Edwards, and almost certainly pilots based on their casual references to extended deployments and the way they carried themselves. Captain Derek Hawk Williams stood about 6'2", with the kind of lean build that suggested he spent time in the gym, but wasn't obsessed with it. His friend was shorter but broader, with intelligent eyes and the slight accent that suggested he'd grown up somewhere in the South. Captain Sarah Phoenix Chen, Maria guessed, though she'd only heard the name in passing. As they finished fueling, Hawk walked toward the station while Phoenix headed to the small auto parts section to browse. Maria straightened behind the counter, slipping into the polite, professional demeanor she'd perfected over 2 decades of customer service. "Hot day," Hawk said, as he approached the counter, credit card in hand. "Every day's hot out here," Maria replied with the kind of small smile that acknowledged the comment without inviting further conversation. "You get a lot of military through here?" "Some. You're from Edwards?" Hawk nodded. "Just got back from Nellis. 3 weeks of red flag exercises." He paused, studying her face with the kind of attention that Maria felt slightly uncomfortable. "You ever serve?" It was a question she'd been asked dozens of times over the years, usually by veterans who recognized something in her posture or the way she scanned the parking lot before locking up at night. Her answer was always the same. "No," she said quietly, "but I respect those who do." Hawk smiled. "Well, thanks for keeping the coffee hot for us road warriors." He signed the credit card receipt and headed for the door, then paused and looked back. "You know, you remind me of someone. Can't place it, but..." He shrugged. "Have a good day." As the 2 pilots drove away in their muscle cars, Maria watched them disappear toward the heat shimmer on the horizon. For just a moment, she allowed herself to remember what it felt like to be part of that world, the camaraderie, the shared understanding of what it meant to put your life on the line for something bigger than yourself. Then she pushed the memories down, the way she had every day for 23 years, and went back to restocking the chip display. Danny would be calling soon for their daily check-in, and she wanted to hear how his final project presentation had gone. She had no way of knowing that Captain Derek Williams was at that very moment pulling out his phone to call his squadron mate, puzzling over why a gas station attendant had looked at him with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "Phoenix, this is weird, but that woman at the gas station, there was something about her, something familiar." "What do you mean?" "I don't know, just a feeling like she knew exactly what we were talking about when we mentioned Nellis." The conversation would have continued, but Phoenix was distracted by traffic merging onto the highway. Neither pilot gave it another thought as they headed back to Edwards Air Force Base, where their F-22 Raptors were being prepped for another training mission. But sometimes the universe has a way of making sure important connections aren't lost forever. And Maria Santos' carefully constructed, invisible life was about to collide with the world she'd left behind in ways she never could have anticipated. 3 days later, Maria was beginning to think the encounter with the 2 pilots had been just another routine interaction when the Black Mustang pulled up to Pump 7 again. This time, however, Captain Derek Williams wasn't alone. He climbed out of the driver's seat while 2 other men emerged from a lifted pickup truck that had followed him into the station. Maria recognized the type immediately, the kind of locals who made her job more difficult than it needed to be. Brad Thompson was a regular, a guy in his early 40s who worked construction when he could find it and spent most of his unemployment checks at the bar down the road. He had the kind of swagger that came from being the biggest fish in a very small pond, and he'd made it clear over the years that he thought Maria should be grateful for his business. "Well, well," Brad called out as he swaggered toward the station entrance, his voice carrying that particular brand of condescension that some men reserved for women in service jobs. "If it isn't our little gas station princess! How's business, sweetheart?" Maria didn't look up from the inventory clipboard she was reviewing. "Can I help you with something, Brad?" "Actually, you can." Brad planted himself in front of the counter, close enough that Maria could smell the beer on his breath despite it being barely noon. "My buddy Rick here thinks you're too good to talk to regular folks. I told him you're just shy, right?" Rick, a heavy-set man with arms covered in poorly done tattoos, laughed. She don't look shy to me, looks stuck up, like she thinks she's better than us working people. Maria kept her expression neutral. 23 years of customer service had taught her that engaging with men like Brad and Rick only made situations worse. Is there something you need to purchase? See? Brad turned to Rick with an exaggerated gesture. Attitude! I've been coming here for 5 years, spending my hard-earned money, and this is the respect I get? Outside, Captain Williams had finished fueling his car and was walking toward the station entrance. Maria hoped his presence might encourage Brad to dial back his usual routine, but she was wrong. Hey there, flyboy, Brad called out as Williams entered. You military? Williams paused, clearly assessing the situation. Air Force. Figures. You guys always think you're so special, don't you? Flying around in your fancy jets while real Americans work for a living. Williams' expression tightened slightly. I work for a living too. Right. Must be nice having taxpayers fund your little joyrides. Brad turned back to Maria. What do you think, Princess? Should we be paying for this guy to play with his toys? Maria felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach. She'd witnessed variations of this scene countless times. Locals taking out their frustrations on military personnel who were just trying to buy gas and get back to base. The worst part was that there was nothing she could do to stop it without making herself a target. I think everyone deserves respect, she said quietly. Brad laughed harshly. Respect? That's rich coming from someone who's been hiding behind that counter for what, 23 years? What would you know about respect? William stepped forward slightly. Hey, that's enough. She's just doing her job. Oh, look at that. The flyboy's got a crush on our gas station girl. What is it about her, Captain? The mystery woman act? Let me tell you something about our Maria here. Brad, please. Maria's voice was firm but controlled. Just buy what you need and move on. Don't tell me what to do. Brad slammed his hand on the counter, making the credit card reader jump. I've been putting up with your stuck-up attitude for years, acting like you're too good to have a normal conversation, like you've got some big secret or something. Williams moved closer to the counter. Sir, I think you should calm down. I'll calm down when I'm ready to calm down, and I don't need some jet jockey telling me how to act in my own town. Rick decided to join in. Yeah, Brad's right. This lady acts like she's somebody special, but look where she is. 40-something years old, working at a gas station. If she was so important, why is she stuck here? The word stung more than Maria wanted to admit. She'd heard variations of this judgment for years, but it never got easier. People saw her job, her modest life, and assumed it meant she had failed at something better. They had no idea what she had chosen to give up or why. There's nothing wrong with honest work, Williams said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from commanding respect in life or death situations. Honest work, Brad laughed. Captain, you don't know the first thing about this woman. For all we know, she could be hiding something, could be one of those people who's running from their past, you know what I mean? The comment hit closer to home than Brad could have possibly known, and Maria felt her carefully maintained composure slip slightly. Williams must have noticed because he stepped fully between Brad and the counter. That's enough, he said, his voice dropping to the tone he probably used with subordinates who were stepping out of the line. You're being disrespectful to a woman who's just trying to do her job. Brad's eyes narrowed. Disrespectful? You want to see disrespectful? He turned back to Maria. Tell you what, Princess, why don't you prove you're not just some nobody hiding out here? Tell us your story. Where'd you come from? What's your big secret? I don't have any secrets, Maria said quietly. But even as she said it, she could feel the weight of the small tattoo on her shoulder blade, hidden beneath her polo shirt. A tattoo that told a story she'd never shared with anyone in Lancaster, not even Danny. Everyone's got secrets, Rick chimed in, especially people who act like they're too good to talk to their customers. Williams pulled out his wallet and placed a 20 on the counter. For pump 7, and I'd like to buy whatever these gentlemen want as well. My treat. The gesture was clearly meant to defuse the situation, but Brad took it as an insult. We don't need your charity, flyboy. We can pay for our own stuff. He leaned forward across the counter, getting too close to Maria. But maybe our mysterious gas station lady here needs to learn some manners. Maybe she needs to understand that customer service means actually serving your customers. That's when Maria made the mistake that would change everything. As Brad leaned forward, she instinctively stepped back and to the side. Not the movement of someone avoiding confrontation, but the calculated positioning of someone who'd been trained to control space and maintain tactical advantage. Williams noticed immediately. His eyes sharpened as he watched Maria's footwork, the way she kept her hands visible but ready, the way she'd positioned herself near the emergency button while maintaining clear sightlines to all exits. For just a moment, their eyes met, and Williams saw something that made him reconsider everything he thought he knew about the quiet woman behind the counter. "You know what?" Brad was saying, oblivious to the silent exchange. "I think it's time someone taught our princess here that she's not as special as she thinks she is." But Captain Derek Williams was no longer listening to Brad Thompson. He was studying Maria Santos with the trained eye of someone who'd spent years evaluating people's capabilities under pressure. And what he was seeing didn't match the story of a woman who'd spent her entire adult life behind a gas station counter. The situation deteriorated rapidly when Officer Kevin Walsh of the Lancaster Sheriff's Department walked through the glass doors. At first, Maria felt a wave of relief. Surely a law enforcement presence would calm Brad down and end this confrontation. But her relief evaporated the moment she saw the expression on Walsh's face. Officer Walsh was in his late 30s, with the kind of small-town cop attitude that came from years of dealing with the same problems and the same people. He'd responded to calls at the gas station before, usually involving drunk customers or minor theft, and Maria had always gotten the impression that he viewed her as part of the problem rather than the solution. "What's going on here?" Walsh asked, his hand resting casually on his duty belt. "Officer, thank God you're here." Brad immediately launched into his performance. "We were just trying to conduct some business when this lady started getting hostile with us, and then this military guy started threatening us." Maria's stomach dropped. She'd seen Brad manipulate situations before, but never with law enforcement involved. "That's not what happened," Williams said firmly. "These men were harassing this woman. I simply asked them to calm down." Walsh looked between Williams and Brad, and Maria could see him making calculations. Brad was a local, someone Walsh had known for years. Williams was military, an outsider, even if he was stationed at Edwards. "Ma'am," Walsh addressed Maria with the kind of tone police officers used when they were already annoyed. "Have you been having problems with customers today?" The question was a trap, and Maria knew it. If she said yes, she'd be admitting there was a problem that needed police intervention, which could result in incident reports that might affect her employment. If she said no, she'd be calling Williams a liar and validating Brad's version of events. "There was a misunderstanding," she said carefully, "but everything's fine now." "See?" Brad jumped in. "She admits it was a misunderstanding, but this military guy wouldn't let it go, started getting aggressive with paying customers." Williams stepped forward. "Officer, that's not—" "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back," Walsh interrupted, his tone carrying official authority. "Let me handle this." Maria watched Williams' jaw tighten. She could see him struggling with the decision to back down or push forward, weighing his military career against his desire to defend someone who was being treated unfairly. "Now," Walsh continued, turning back to Maria, "Brad here says you've been giving him attitude for years. Says you act like you're too good for regular customers. That true?" The question felt like a slap. Maria had worked in customer service long enough to know that some people would always find fault, no matter how professional you tried to be. But having those complaints validated by a police officer in front of witnesses was humiliating in a way she hadn't expected. "I try to treat all customers with respect," Maria said quietly. "Try?" Rick laughed. "That's a good one. Lady barely looks at us when we come in here. Acts like we're bothering her just by existing." Walsh nodded as if Rick's comment confirmed something he had suspected. "Ma'am, customer service is part of your job description, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." "Then maybe you need to work on your attitude. These gentlemen are regular customers, taxpayers in this community. They deserve to be treated with courtesy." Williams looked like he wanted to explode. "Officer, you weren't here. You didn't see what actually happened. These men were being aggressive and disrespectful." "Captain," Walsh's voice carried a warning, "I'm going to need you to let me do my job here. Unless you want to file a formal complaint, I suggest you complete your business and move on." The dismissal was clear. Williams could either drop it and leave, or escalate to formal complaints and paperwork that probably would go nowhere and might even reflect poorly on him with his superiors. Brad was grinning now, clearly enjoying watching both Maria and Williams being put in their place by local authority. See, Officer Walsh gets it. Some people need to learn their place in the community. That's enough, Walsh said, but his tone suggested he agreed more than he disagreed. He turned back to Maria. Ma'am, I don't want to have to come back here for more customer service issues. You understand what I'm saying? Maria felt something cold settle in her stomach. The implicit threat was clear. If there were more complaints, more incidents, she could lose her job. After 23 years of building a quiet, stable life, of working double shifts to put Danny through college, she was being threatened by people who had no idea what she'd sacrificed to be here. I understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Williams was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Disappointment? Confusion? She couldn't tell, but she could see him recalculating everything he thought he knew about the situation. Good, Walsh said. Now, Brad, Rick, ye gentlemen get what you need and let this lady get back to work. Captain, I trust you can complete your transaction without any more drama? As Walsh headed for the door, Brad leaned across the counter one more time, his voice low enough that only Maria could hear. That's what happens when you get too big for your britches, sweetheart. Next time, maybe you'll remember who your real customers are.
Rick bought a pack of cigarettes and an energy drink, making a show of counting out exact change very slowly, while commenting on how some people needed to learn basic courtesy. Williams stood behind them, rigid with controlled anger, his hands clenched at his sides. When the two locals finally left, laughing and congratulating each other on their victory, Williams approached the counter. Maria expected him to say something supportive, maybe offer sympathy for what had just happened. Instead, he looked at her with eyes that held questions she wasn't prepared to answer. That wasn't your first time dealing with aggressive men in a confined space, he said quietly. Maria's blood ran cold. I work customer service. You deal with all kinds. No, Williams shook his head. That movement you made when Brad leaned forward, that was tactical positioning. And the way you assessed the room when Walsh came in, checking exits and sight lines, that's not customer service training. Maria's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. The hell you don't. Williams's voice was quiet but intense. Lady, I've been flying combat missions for 12 years. I know what training looks like, and you've had training that goes way beyond dealing with difficult customers. The accusation hung in the air between them like a challenge. Maria could feel everything she'd built over the past 2 decades balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong word, one slip, and her carefully constructed invisible life would start unraveling. Captain, I think you should finish your business and leave, she said, using the same tone Walsh had used to dismiss him earlier. Williams studied her for another long moment, then placed exact change on the counter for his gas. As he turned to go, he paused at the door. You know what the really interesting thing is, he said without turning around. You called me captain, but I never told you my rank. The door chimed as he left, and Maria was alone with the sudden, terrifying realization that her past was about to catch up with her, whether she wanted it to or not. The next morning brought news that made Maria's stomach clench with dread. Her manager, Dave Mitchell, called just as she was unlocking the station doors at 5:30 a.m. Maria, we need to talk. Dave's voice was strained through the phone. I got a call from corporate last night. Apparently there was some kind of incident yesterday involving a police response. Maria closed her eyes, leaning against the glass door she'd just unlocked. There was a misunderstanding with some customers. Officer Walsh came by, but nothing serious happened. Nothing serious? Dave's voice pitched higher. Maria, I got 3 different versions of this story. One from the police report, one from Brad Thompson, who called to file a complaint, and one from some Air Force captain who apparently witnessed the whole thing? The fact that Williams had made his own report surprised Maria. She'd assumed he would just let it go after their confrontation at the counter.
Dave, I can explain. You don't need to explain to me, Dave interrupted. But corporate is sending a regional manager down this afternoon. They want to interview you about customer relations and workplace professionalism. Maria felt the walls closing in. After 23 years of spotless employment, of never missing a shift, of handling every crisis from armed robberies to medical emergencies with quiet competence, she was being investigated because Brad Thompson had hurt feelings. What did Captain Williams report? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. That's the weird part. His report actually supported you, said Thompson was being aggressive and inappropriate, but he also mentioned some concerns about your unusual responses to tactical situations and possible undisclosed military background? What the hell does that mean, Maria? The question she'd been dreading for 23 years, asked by someone who had the power to destroy the life she'd built for Danny and herself. I don't know, she lied. Maybe he misunderstood something. Look, Maria, you're a good employee. Hell, you're the best employee I've ever had. But if corporate thinks there's something you're hiding, something that could affect our insurance or liability... Dave's voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. I understand. What time is the meeting? 3. And Maria, if there's anything at all, that I should know before this meeting, now would be the time to tell me. Maria stared out at the empty highway, watching the heat shimmer already beginning to rise from the asphalt despite the early hour. There's nothing, Dave. I just want to keep doing my job. After hanging up, Maria went through the motions of opening the station, but her mind was racing. She had 8 hours before the meeting that could end her career and destroy Danny's future. 8 hours to figure out how to explain away 23 years of carefully maintained lies without revealing the truth that would change everything. At 10:30 a.m., Danny called for their daily check-in, his voice bright with excitement about his final semester project. Maria listened to him describe his design for a new guidance system component, forcing herself to smile even though he couldn't see her. Aunt Maria, you okay? You sound distracted. Just tired, Mijo. Long night. You working too hard again. When I graduate and get that job at Lockheed Martin, first thing I'm doing is getting you out of that gas station. The innocence in his voice, the assumption that she'd been working at the gas station because she had no other choice, cut deeper than any insult Brad Thompson had thrown at her. Danny, what would you say if you found out I used to do something else before I came to live with you? Like what? You mean before you started taking care of me? Yeah. Danny was quiet for a moment. I'd say it doesn't matter. You gave up whatever you were doing to raise me. That makes you the best person I know no matter what your job was before. The simple faith in his voice nearly broke her. Here was this brilliant young man, 6 months away from graduation, with his whole future ahead of him because she'd chosen to sacrifice her identity to give him a chance. I love you, Danny. Love you too, Tia. Hey, I gotta run to class, but I'll call you tonight, okay? After he hung up, Maria sat in the empty station and allowed herself to remember, really remember, for the first time in years. Captain Maria Elena Santos, 355th Fighter Squadron, A-10 Thunderbolt II. Call sign Hammer. 43 combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan. Distinguished Flying Cross. Purple Heart. Air Medal with 5 oak leaf clusters. The woman who'd saved a pinned-down Marine unit by making repeated strafing runs through surface-to-air missile fire, taking shrapnel in her shoulder, but staying in the fight until every Marine was evacuated safely. The woman who'd been featured in Air Force Times as one of the most decorated female pilots of her generation. The woman who'd walked away from all of it when an 8-year-old boy needed her more than the Air Force did. At 2:45 p.m., a silver sedan pulled into the parking lot. Maria watched through the windows as a woman in a business suit climbed out, followed by Dave Mitchell. The corporate regional manager had arrived 15 minutes early. Never a good sign.
But as they approached the station entrance, Maria noticed something else. The black Mustang was back, parked at pump 6. Captain Williams was leaning against his car, not pumping gas, just watching. Their eyes met through the glass, and Maria saw something in his expression that hadn't been there before. Not suspicion or confusion, but recognition and concern. Somehow between yesterday's confrontation and this morning, Derek Williams had figured out exactly who she was. The question was, what was he planning to do about it? As Dave and the regional manager entered the station, Williams straightened up and started walking toward the entrance. 3 separate forces were about to converge on Maria Santos: corporate authority that could fire her, military recognition that could expose her, and her own desperate need to protect the life she'd built for Danny. For the first time in 23 years, Maria couldn't see a way to control the situation without losing everything she'd worked so hard to protect. The breaking point had finally arrived. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The corporate regional manager was exactly what Maria had expected. A woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled hair, an expensive suit, and the kind of clipboard that meant serious business. She introduced herself as Janet Reeves from headquarters, and her handshake was firm enough to convey authority without being aggressive. "Ms. Santos, I'm sure Dave has explained why I'm here," Janet said as they settled around the small table in the station's break room. "We take customer relations very seriously, and when we receive multiple reports about the same incident, we need to investigate." Through the break room's small window, Maria could see Captain Williams still standing by his car, apparently in no hurry to leave. Dave noticed her glance and frowned. "Is that customer waiting for service?" Dave asked. "I'll handle him after we're done here," Maria replied, hoping Williams would have the sense to leave before things got more complicated. Janet opened her folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. "Let's start with Brad Thompson's complaint. He alleges that you've been consistently rude and dismissive toward him and other local customers, and that yesterday's incident was the culmination of years of poor service." Maria had expected this. "Brad Thompson has been coming here for about 5 years. In that time, I've served him professionally and courteously, despite the fact that he frequently makes inappropriate comments and sometimes appears intoxicated during business hours." "Inappropriate comments?" Janet made a note. "Comments about my appearance, my personal life, suggestions that I should be friendlier to male customers?" Maria kept her voice steady and professional. "I've never made formal complaints because I didn't want to cause problems, but I've always maintained appropriate professional boundaries." Dave shifted uncomfortably. He'd clearly never heard this side of the story. "And yesterday's incident?" Janet continued. Maria recounted the events as objectively as she could. Brad's escalating aggression, Williams' attempt to defuse the situation, and Officer Walsh's response. She was careful to stick to observable facts and avoid characterizing anyone's motivations. "Now," Janet said, consulting another sheet of paper, "we also received a report from Captain Derek Williams of the Air Force. His account supports your version of events regarding Mr. Thompson's behavior, but he raised some interesting questions about your background." Maria's heart rate spiked, but she kept her expression neutral. "What kind of questions?" "He seems to think you have undisclosed military experience. He mentioned specific observations about your tactical awareness and professional demeanor under pressure. He also noted that you demonstrated knowledge of military rank structure." The room fell silent except for the hum of the ancient air conditioning unit. Dave was staring at Maria with an expression she'd never seen before. Not suspicion exactly, but intense curiosity. "Ms. Santos," Janet continued, "when you applied for this position 23 years ago, you listed your previous employment as general office work and retail. Is there anything about your work history that you didn't disclose?" This was the moment Maria had dreaded for over 2 decades. She could continue lying, maintain the fiction that had protected Danny and herself for so long, or she could tell the truth and watch everything they'd built together crumble. "No," she said quietly. "My employment history is accurate as reported." Janet studied her for a long moment. "Miss Santos, I have to ask, do you have any military experience?" "No." It was the same lies she had told hundreds of times to dozens of people in countless situations. But this time, something must have shown in her expression because Janet's eyes narrowed slightly. "The reason I ask is that Captain Williams seemed very certain about his observations.
He specifically mentioned that your response to an aggressive confrontation was consistent with professional military training in crowd control and de-escalation. Through the window, Maria could see Williams walking toward the station entrance. Her stomach dropped. "Dave, could you handle that customer? I think we should finish this conversation privately." But it was too late. The door chimed, and Williams walked in with the purposeful stride of someone who had made a decision. "Excuse me," he said, approaching their table. "I'm Captain Derek Williams. I believe you wanted to speak with me about yesterday's incident." Janet was surprised. "Captain Williams? I wasn't expecting you to come in person. We were just discussing your report with Miss Santos." Williams glanced at Maria, and she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like an apology. "Actually, there's something important I need to add to my report. Something I should have mentioned initially." "What's that?" Janet asked, her pen poised over her notepad. Williams reached into his pocket and pulled out his smartphone. "Last night I did some research. I've been trying to figure out why Miss Santos seems so familiar to me." Maria's blood turned to ice. Whatever he'd found, whatever he was about to reveal, there would be no coming back from it. "Captain," I said, her voice barely steady, "I don't think this is necessary." "I think it is," Williams interrupted gently. "Miss Santos, I know you value your privacy, but these people deserve to know who they're really dealing with."
He turned his phone toward Janet and Dave, showing them something on the screen. Maria couldn't see what it was, but she watched their expressions change from curiosity to confusion to something approaching awe. "Is this real?" Janet whispered. Williams nodded. "Pulled it from the Air Force Historical Research Agency database. Public records, declassified after 10 years. Dave was staring at the phone screen like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Maria, is this you?" Maria closed her eyes, feeling 23 years of carefully constructed anonymity crumbling around her. Whatever Williams had found, photos, service records, commendations, there would be no denying it now. "Miss Santos," Janet's voice had completely changed, from corporate authority to something much more tentative. "According to this, you're—" Maria opened her eyes and looked directly at Williams. He was holding up a photograph, an official Air Force photo of a woman in flight gear standing in front of an A-10 Thunderbolt II. The woman was 23 years younger, but unmistakably Maria Santos. "According to this," Williams said quietly, "she's Captain Maria Elena Santos, one of the most decorated A-10 pilots in Air Force history." The silence in the break room was deafening. Dave was staring at Maria like he'd never seen her before. Janet had set down her pen and was looking between the photo and Maria with an expression of complete bewilderment. "The woman you've been investigating for poor customer service flew 43 combat missions, earned a Distinguished Flying Cross, and saved the lives of 18 Marines in a single engagement." Maria sat perfectly still, watching her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. There was no point in denying it now, no way to put this particular genie back in its bottle. The question was, what came next? The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Dave finally found his voice. "Maria," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "is this real? Were you really a pilot?" Maria looked at the faces around the table. Dave's confusion, Janet's shock, Williams's careful concern. After 23 years of deflecting questions and maintaining her cover, the truth felt strange on her tongue. "Yes," she said simply, "I was." Janet picked up Williams's phone with trembling hands, studying the photograph more closely. Captain Maria Elena Santos, 355th Fighter Squadron, Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal with 5 oak leaf clusters, Purple Heart. Her voice trailed off as she scrolled through the service record. "Purple Heart?" Dave's voice cracked slightly. "You were wounded in combat?" Maria's hand instinctively moved toward her shoulder, where shrapnel scars were hidden beneath her polo shirt. "It was a long time ago."
Williams leaned forward slightly. Miss Santos, the record shows you were shot down over Afghanistan in 2003. You evaded capture for 6 days before rescue, then returned to flight status within 3 months. The citation mentions extraordinary heroism under fire and actions above and beyond the call of duty. You were shot down? Dave looked like he was having trouble processing this information. Maria, I've known you for 8 years. How did you never mention that you were a war hero? Because I'm not, Maria said firmly. I was a pilot who did her job. When my job was done, I came home and started a new life. Janet was still scrolling through the records on Williams's phone. According to this, you left active duty in 2001. That means you've been working here for, she looked up doing quick math. You've been here longer than your entire military career. The observation hit harder than Janet probably intended. Maria had spent 6 years in the Air Force, including flight training, and 23 years behind the counter at Riverside Gas Go, more than 3 times as long in her second life as in her first. Why? Dave asked, and the simple question carried the weight of everything he thought he knew about his employee. I mean, with decorations like this, you could have stayed in the military, become a general or something. You could have worked for Boeing, Lockheed Martin, any defense contractor. Why here? Williams was watching Maria carefully, and she could see him putting pieces together. You had family obligations, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. My brother and his wife died in a car accident in 2001. Danny was 8. He needed someone to take care of him, and military life isn't compatible with raising a child alone. The room fell silent again as the full scope of Maria's sacrifice became clear. She hadn't just left the military. She'd walked away from a distinguished career, from recognition, from a future that could have included anything she wanted, all to raise her orphan nephew in anonymity. Danny, Dave said, recognition dawning, the kid who calls you every day, the one you're putting through college. Engineering degree from UC Davis. He graduates in 6 months. Janet looked up from the phone. Miss Santos, I have to ask, why didn't you disclose your military service when you applied here? This kind of background, these qualifications, they could have been assets to our company. Maria had been dreading this question for 23 years, but now that it was here, the answer felt obvious. Because I didn't want to be treated differently. I didn't want people looking at me and seeing a war hero or a decorated pilot. I just wanted to work, earn a living, and raise my nephew in peace. But you could have done so much more, Janet pressed, with your qualifications, your security clearance. I did what I needed to do, Maria interrupted. Danny needed stability, consistency. He needed someone who would be there every day, not someone deploying overseas or traveling for high-level defense contracts. Williams nodded slowly. You chose family over career. I chose what mattered most. Dave was shaking his head in amazement. 23 years, Maria. You've been here 23 years, and I had no idea. The night shifts you worked to pay for his school, the double shifts during his senior year of high school when he needed tutoring. He's trailed off as he remembered all the times Maria had taken extra shifts without complaint. You never asked for recognition, Janet said, still studying the service record. Never asked for special treatment or accommodations. You just worked. That's what I came here to do. Williams pulled out his own phone and dialed a number. Captain Sarah Chen, this is Hawk. I need you to get down to the Riverside Gas Go on Highway 14. Trust me on this. Just come. Maria looked at him with alarm. What are you doing? Phoenix needs to see this. She's going to want to meet you. Captain Williams, Ma'am, with all due respect, what you want stopped mattering the minute Brad Thompson decided to harass a decorated combat veteran in front of witnesses. Williams's voice carried the authority of someone used to making command decisions. This story is going to get out. Better it gets out the right way. Janet was nodding slowly. He's right, Miss Santos. Once word spreads about who you really are, everything changes anyway. But Danny, Maria started.
Will be proud of his aunt who gave up everything for him, Dave finished. Maria, this doesn't change anything about your job security. If anything, it explains why you're the most reliable, most competent employee we've ever had. Through the break room window, Maria could see another car pulling into the parking lot, a silver Camaro that she recognized as belonging to Captain Chen. Soon, there would be more questions, more people who wanted to know her story, more attention focused on the life she'd tried so hard to keep private. But as she sat there, surrounded by people who were looking at her with something approaching reverence instead of the casual dismissal she'd grown accustomed to, Maria realized something had fundamentally shifted. For the first time in 23 years, she wasn't hiding anymore. The question was whether she was ready for what came next. Captain Sarah Phoenix Chen walked through the gas station doors with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding million-dollar aircraft. But she stopped short when she saw the scene in the break room. Through the glass partition, she could see Williams, a corporate-looking woman, and what appeared to be a very serious conversation with the gas station attendant. "Huck, what's going on?" she called out as she approached. Williams gestured her over. "Phoenix, I need you to look at something." He held up his phone, showing the same Air Force photograph that had stunned Janet and Dave minutes earlier. Captain Chen studied the image, her expression shifting from curiosity to recognition to complete shock. "Holy shit," she breathed, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, ma'am, but this is Captain Maria Santos, Hammer Santos." Maria winced at the sound of her old call sign. She'd almost forgotten that pilots knew each other's legends, that stories traveled through the Air Force community like wildfire. "You know her service record?" Williams asked. "Know it? Every A-10 pilot knows about Hammer Santos. She's in the textbooks now." Chen looked at Maria with something approaching awe. "Ma'am, you're the pilot who made the Kandahar run, the one who saved 3rd Marines from that ambush." Janet looked between Chen and Maria. "What's the Kandahar run?" Chen pulled out her own phone and began searching military databases. May 15, 2003. A Marine reconnaissance unit got pinned down by insurgents in a valley outside Kandahar. They were trapped for 8 hours, taking casualties, running low on ammunition. Air support was grounded because of a sandstorm. "Except for one pilot," Williams added quietly, understanding dawning in his voice. Captain Santos flew her A-10 through zero visibility conditions to provide close air support. She made 17 attack runs over 6 hours, taking heavy ground fire the entire time. On her final pass, her aircraft was hit by a surface-to-air missile. Dave was listening with his mouth slightly open. "You were shot down?" "My hydraulics were damaged," Maria said quietly. "I managed to keep the aircraft flying long enough to get away from the combat zone." "She crash-landed in the desert 40 miles from friendly forces," Chen corrected, still reading. "Then evaded enemy patrols for 6 days before rescue. The Marines she saved, all 18 of them made it home." Janet was taking notes furiously. "Miss Santos, why didn't any of this come up in your background check when you were hired?" "Because I specifically requested that my service record be flagged for privacy. Standard background checks only show basic information, dates of service, honorable discharge status. The details are restricted unless there's a specific security clearance requirement." Williams was scrolling through additional records on his phone. "It says here you were recommended for the Medal of Honor, but you declined the nomination." "I didn't decline it. I requested that it be downgraded to the Distinguished Flying Cross. I didn't want the attention that comes with the Medal of Honor." "Why?" Janet asked. Maria looked around the room at the faces staring at her. Dave, who'd known her for 8 years as a quiet, reliable employee, Janet, who had come here to investigate complaints about her customer service, and 2 Air Force pilots who were looking at her like she was a living legend. "Because attention changes everything," she said simply. "Medal of Honor recipients get invited to White House ceremonies, corporate boards, speaking engagements. Their faces end up on magazine covers and in documentaries. I had an 8-year-old nephew who needed his aunt to pick him up from school every day and help him with his homework, not someone who was traveling around the country being celebrated as a war hero." The room fell silent as the full weight of her sacrifice became clear. She hadn't just given up military advancement.
She'd actively turned down recognition that could have set her up for life, all to maintain the anonymity she needed to be a full-time guardian. Chen was still scrolling through records. "Ma'am, according to this, you logged over 400 combat hours. That's more than most pilots see in their entire careers." It was a busy deployment. Busy? Williams laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Captain, you have more combat experience than half the generals currently serving." Dave was shaking his head slowly. "Maria, I've watched you handle everything from armed robberies to medical emergencies. You never panic, never lose your cool. I always wondered where that came from." "Customer service training," Maria said with the ghost of a smile. Janet closed her notebook and looked at Maria with an expression that had completely transformed from when she had arrived. "Miss Santos, I came here today to investigate complaints about your professionalism and customer relations. Instead, I find out that we've been employing one of the most decorated combat pilots in recent military history." "Does that change anything?" Maria asked. "It changes everything," Janet replied. "The complaints against you were filed by people who had no idea who they were dealing with. A woman who flew combat missions to save Marines' lives probably has a different perspective on what constitutes a real emergency versus someone being upset about having to wait in line for coffee."
William's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen, and his expression grew serious. "It's my squadron commander. Word travels fast in the Air Force community." He answered the call, stepping away from the table. Maria could hear his side of the conversation. "Yes, sir. She's here." "No, sir. She's been working at a gas station for 23 years. "Yes, sir. I'm certain it's her." Chen was still reading through Maria's service record, shaking her head in amazement. "Ma'am, I have to ask, do you ever miss it? Flying, I mean." Maria was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the empty sky above the desert. "Every day," she admitted, "but I've never regretted my choice." Williams hung up his phone and returned to the table, his expression grim. "Ma'am, that was Colonel Patterson, my squadron commander. Word about your identity has reached Edwards Air Force Base. He's requesting permission to come speak with you personally." "About what?" Maria asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "About whether you'd consider coming out of retirement." The offer hung in the air like a challenge to everything Maria had built over the past 2 decades. After 23 years of hiding her identity, the Air Force wanted her back. The question was, what did she want? 20 minutes later, the break room had been transformed into an impromptu briefing room. Colonel James Patterson had arrived from Edwards Air Force Base with 2 other officers, had temporarily closed for staff meeting. Colonel Patterson was a man in his mid-50s, with the kind of bearing that came from years of command responsibility. He sat across from Maria with a folder thick enough to contain her entire military history, his expression a mixture of respect and curiosity. "Captain Santos," he began, then corrected himself. "Ms. Santos, I have to admit, when Captain Williams called this morning, I thought there had been some mistake. According to our records, you've been listed as whereabouts unknown since your discharge in 2001. "I wasn't hiding from the Air Force," Maria said quietly. "I just wanted to live quietly." With good reason, apparently. Colonel Patterson opened the folder and pulled out a series of photographs. "These are some of the Marines you saved during the Kandahar operation, taken at their unit reunion last month." Maria's breath caught as she looked at the photos. Young faces she remembered from mission briefings, now older, surrounded by wives and children she'd never met. "Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez," Patterson said, pointing to one photograph. "He's a high school principal now in Colorado, has 3 daughters. He sends a letter to Air Force personnel every year on May 15th, asking if there's any way to contact the pilot who saved his life." He moved to another photo. "Corporal James Mitchell, he goes by Mitch now, runs a construction company in North Carolina, named his son Marcus after his squad leader who didn't make it out of that valley." Maria's eyes welled up. She remembered Sergeant Marcus Webb, a 22-year-old from Ohio who'd been hit by sniper fire during the early hours of the engagement. She'd stayed on station long enough to provide cover for the medical evacuation, but it hadn't been enough. They all know your call sign, Patterson continued. They know Hammer Santos is the reason they came home, but none of them have ever been able to thank you personally. Captain Chen leaned forward. Ma'am, if I may ask, what was it like flying through that sandstorm? Maria was quiet for a long moment, remembering. Visibility was less than a quarter mile. I was flying by instruments and radio guidance from the ground controller, a 19-year-old Marine who stayed calm under fire for 8 straight hours. She paused. The hardest part wasn't the flying. It was listening to them on the radio, hearing them call for help, and knowing that if I made a mistake, those boys were going to die. The mission reports say you made 17 attack runs. That's unprecedented for those conditions. I made as many runs as it took. You don't leave Marines behind. Dave had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. Maria, you've told me stories about difficult customers, about handling emergencies at the station. You never mentioned that you used to save people's lives for a living. Different kind of emergency response, Maria said with a slight smile. Colonel Patterson pulled out another document. Miss Santos, I have authorization from Air Force Personnel Command to discuss a proposition with you. Given the current need for experienced combat pilots and your exemplary service record, we'd like to offer you the opportunity to return to active duty. The room fell silent. Maria stared at Patterson, processing what he'd just said. I'm 59 years old, Colonel. I haven't been in an aircraft cockpit in over 20 years. Age isn't a disqualifier for experienced pilots, especially with your combat record. We've had pilots return to service after longer breaks. Patterson leaned forward. The Air Force has changed since you left, Ms. Santos. We have better support systems for families, more flexible deployment schedules, and frankly, we need people with your experience training the next generation. Janet, who had been taking notes throughout the conversation, looked up. What would this mean for her employment here? Military leave of absence would be required under federal law, but honestly, with Captain Santos's qualifications, she could write her own ticket anywhere in the defense industry. William spoke up. Ma'am, if I may, the younger pilots today have incredible technology, but most of them have never faced the kind of conditions you flew through. They need to learn from someone who's been tested in real combat. Maria looked around the room at the faces watching her expectantly. These people were offering her everything she had given up 23 years ago. Recognition, purpose, the chance to fly again. The chance to be Captain Hammer Santos instead of just Maria from the gas station. I need to make a phone call, she said quietly. Patterson nodded. Of course, this is a big decision. Maria stepped outside into the desert heat and dialed Danny's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice bright with excitement. Dia, you're calling early today. Everything okay? Danny, I need to tell you something about who I used to be before I came to live with you. Okay, that sounds serious. What's going on?
Maria looked back through the gas station windows at the group of officers waiting inside, then up at the vast desert sky where she'd once felt more at home than anywhere on Earth. I used to be a pilot, mijo, a fighter pilot, and some people want me to consider going back. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before Danny spoke, his voice filled with wonder. Aunt Maria, are you telling me you're a badass? Despite everything, the stress, the uncertainty, the weight of the decision ahead, Maria laughed. Really laughed, for the first time in longer than she could remember. Yeah, Danny, I guess I am. Then whatever you decide, I'm proud of you, and I always have been, even before I knew you were a war hero. As Maria walked back into the station, she realized that for the first time in 23 years, she had a choice to make about her future. Not a choice forced by circumstances or family obligations, but a real choice about who she wanted to be for the rest of her life. The question was no longer what she owed to others, but what she owed to herself.
News traveled fast in a small desert town, especially news as extraordinary as the revelation that the quiet woman at the gas station was a decorated war hero. By the time Maria returned from her phone call with Danny, a small crowd had gathered in the parking lot. Some curious locals, a few off-duty Edwards personnel who'd gotten word, and a news van from the local television station. But the most interesting arrival was Officer Kevin Walsh's patrol car, parked near the station entrance with its occupant sitting behind the wheel, apparently working up the courage to come inside. Colonel Patterson noticed Maria watching the police car. "Is there a problem with local law enforcement?" "Officer Walsh was here yesterday during the incident with Brad Thompson," Maria explained. "He sided with Thompson and threatened my job security." Williams's expression darkened. "The officer who dismissed your concerns and treated you like a troublemaker?" "He was doing his job as he understood it," Maria said diplomatically. "No," Janet interjected, consulting her notes. "According to both your account and Captain Williams' report, Officer Walsh made assumptions about the situation without investigating, then used his authority to intimidate you into compliance." Through the window, they watched Walsh finally exit his patrol car and approach the station. His body language was completely different from yesterday. Less swagger, more uncertainty. The news had clearly reached the sheriff's department. The door chimed as Walsh entered, and he immediately noticed the group of Air Force officers. His eyes found Maria behind the counter, and she could see him processing what he'd learned about her identity. "Miss Santos," he said, his voice carefully formal. "Could I speak with you privately?" "Anything you need to say to me can be said in front of these people," Maria replied. Walsh glanced around the room, clearly uncomfortable with the audience. "I came to apologize for my handling of yesterday's incident. I've since learned about your background, and I realize I may have misjudged the situation." "May have misjudged?" Captain Chen stepped forward, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of command responsibility. "Officer, you threatened a decorated combat veteran with job loss for being harassed by drunk customers." "I didn't know about her military service." "Her military service shouldn't matter," Williams interrupted. "She was being verbally abused by aggressive customers. Your job was to assess the situation objectively, not to assume the woman was at fault because she was outnumbered." Walsh's face reddened. "Look, I'm trying to make this right." "Are you?" Colonel Patterson's voice was quiet, but carried unmistakable command authority. "Officer Walsh, I'm curious about something. When you responded to this call yesterday, did you take statements from all parties involved?" "Well, no, but did you review any security footage before making your assessment? The station doesn't have security cameras covering the interior. Did you ask Miss Santos for her version of events before deciding she was the problem?" Walsh was sweating now. "I spoke to her, yes. According to the reports I've read, you told her that customer service was part of her job description and warned her about future customer relations issues. Is that accurate?" I was trying to de-escalate." "You were trying to take the easy way out," Janet said firmly. "Rather than deal with intoxicated, aggressive customers, you blamed the victim and threatened her employment." Maria watched Walsh squirm under the scrutiny of people who clearly outranked him in both authority and moral standing. Part of her felt sorry for him. He'd made a mistake that probably seemed minor at the time, but had taken on massive proportions now that her identity was known. "Officer Walsh," she said quietly, "I accept your apology. But I want you to remember this feeling the next time you're tempted to make assumptions about someone based on their job or their willingness to speak up for themselves." Walsh nodded gratefully. "Yes, ma'am. And for what it's worth, I called in Brad Thompson this morning. He's being charged with public intoxication and disturbing the peace." "What about my complaint against me?" Maria asked. "Withdrawn," he quickly. "Once he sobered up and heard about who you are, he realized his complaint wouldn't hold water." Williams snorted.
Convenient. He's perfectly comfortable harassing a gas station attendant, but suddenly develops respect when he finds out she's a war hero. The door chimed again, and Dave looked up to see a familiar figure entering the station, Brad Thompson himself, looking considerably less confident than he had the day before. He stopped short when he saw the group of military officers, his eyes darting around the room before settling on Maria. Brad cleared his throat. I came to apologize. The silence was deafening. Maria could feel the tension radiating from Williams and Chen, both of whom were clearly struggling to maintain professional composure. Yesterday, I was out of line, Brad continued, his voice barely above a mumble. I said some things that were disrespectful, and I'm sorry. Are you sorry because you were wrong, or because you found out who I am? Brad's face flushed. Both, I guess.
That's the problem, Colonel Patterson said, stepping forward. Mr. Thompson, yesterday you felt comfortable verbally abusing a woman who was doing her job professionally. Today you're apologetic because you learned she's a decorated veteran. What does that say about how you treat people you consider beneath you? Brad looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to think, Maria said, about how you treat service workers, about how you use your size and voice to intimidate people who can't fight back. I want you to remember that everyone has a story, and you don't know what someone has been through or what they've sacrificed. Yes, ma'am, Brad mumbled. And Brad, Maria's voice carried a new edge, if you ever speak to another woman the way you spoke to me yesterday, you're going to find out that customer service wasn't the only training I received in the military. The threat was delivered quietly, but everyone in the room understood its implications. Brad nodded quickly and practically ran out of the station. Officer Walsh looked around the room one more time. Miss Santos, again, I apologize. If there's anything I can do— There is, Maria said. The next time you respond to a customer service complaint, remember that there are usually multiple sides to every story. And remember that a woman asking to be treated with respect isn't causing trouble. She's asking for basic human dignity. After Walsh left, the room was quiet for several minutes. Finally, Dave spoke up. 23 years, he said, shaking his head. You've been dealing with people like Brad for 23 years, and you never once used your background to shut them down. Because that's not who I wanted to be. I didn't want to be Captain Santos, who happened to work at a gas station. I wanted to be Maria, who worked at a gas station and had a past that didn't define her present. But it does define you, Captain Chen said softly. The discipline, the calm under pressure, the way you handle emergencies, that's all from your training and experience. Maria looked around at the faces watching her, people who now saw her completely differently than they had that morning. Maybe. But the question is, what do I do with that now?
3 weeks later, Maria stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 5:15 a.m., but for the first time in 23 years, she wasn't getting ready for a shift at the gas station. Instead, she was putting on a uniform she hadn't worn in over 2 decades, the blue service dress of the United States Air Force, with ribbons and decorations that told the story of a career most people could only dream about. The decision hadn't been easy. After Colonel Patterson's offer, Maria had spent sleepless nights weighing her options, talking with Danny, and confronting the question of who she wanted to be for the rest of her life. The turning point had come during a phone conversation with Danny 3 days after the revelation. "Tia," he'd said, "I've been thinking about something. You gave up flying, something you loved, to take care of me. But I'm graduating in 3 months. I'm going to have a good job, my own life. If you don't go back to what you love now, when will you?" "Danny, I'm almost 50. Most people my age are thinking about retirement, not starting new careers." "You're not most people. You're the woman who flew through sandstorms to save Marines. You're the woman who turned down the Medal of Honor because you didn't want the attention to interfere with raising me." His voice had grown serious. "I'm proud to be your nephew, but I don't want to be the reason you never fly again." That conversation had made the choice clear. Maria had called Colonel Patterson the next day and accepted a position as a senior flight instructor at Edwards Air Force Base, with a special mandate to develop training programs for combat pilots operating in adverse conditions. Now, as she pinned her captain's bars to her uniform collar, she'd been offered an immediate promotion to major, but had requested to return at her previous rank. Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: excitement about going to work. Dave had been incredibly supportive when she had given him her notice. "Maria, I've known for 8 years that you were overqualified for this job. I just never imagined how overqualified." He'd arranged for her to train her replacement, ironically, a young veteran named Jessica Martinez, who'd served as a helicopter mechanic in Afghanistan, and had thrown a farewell party that half the town attended. The local newspaper had run a front-page story about Lancaster's hidden hero, complete with photos from her Air Force service and interviews with some of the Marines she'd saved. The story had been picked up by national outlets, turning Maria into exactly the kind of public figure she'd spent 23 years avoiding. But something had changed in how she felt about the attention. Maybe it was seeing the pride in Danny's eyes when reporters interviewed him about his badass aunt. Maybe it was the letters she'd received from families of the Marines she'd saved, thanking her for bringing their loved ones home. Or maybe it was simply the realization that hiding from your past didn't make it disappear. It just made it harder to learn from. As Maria drove through the gates of Edwards Air Force Base for her first day back, she passed the Riverside Gas Go where she'd spent more than half her adult life. Jessica was behind the counter, handling the morning rush with the same quiet competence Maria had brought to the job for 23 years. The guard at the base gate checked her credentials and saluted, a gesture of respect she'd forgotten she'd missed. As she drove toward the flight training center, Maria saw F-22 Raptors lined up on the tarmac, their sleek forms a stark contrast to the stubby, heavily armored A-10s she'd once flown. Colonel Patterson was waiting for her in his office, along with Captain Williams and Captain Chen, both of whom had requested transfers to the training division to work with her. "Captain Santos," Patterson said, standing as she entered. "Welcome back to the Air Force." "Thank you, sir. It feels good to be back." "Your first class of students is waiting in briefing room 3, Williams said with a grin. 24 hotshots who think they know everything about flying because they can operate the most advanced fighter jets ever built. "And your job," Chen added, "is to teach them what you learned flying through sandstorms with nothing but instruments and prayer, that technology is only as good as the pilot using it." As Maria walked toward the briefing room door, she heard the voices of young pilots inside, confident, eager, probably a little cocky. They reminded her of herself at their age.
But they were about to learn from someone who'd been tested in ways most of them couldn't imagine. Someone who'd made impossible shots in impossible conditions, who'd chosen family over glory, and who'd spent 23 years proving that heroism wasn't about the recognition you received, but about the choices you made when no one was watching. Maria opened the door and stepped inside, where 24 young pilots immediately fell silent and stood at attention. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned respect through action rather than rank. "I'm Captain Santos, and I'm here to teach you something your flight simulators can't: how to fly when everything goes wrong and lives depend on your decisions." As she looked at their faces, young, determined, ready to serve, Marina realized that this was exactly where she belonged, not hiding from her past, not defined entirely by it, but using it to build something better for the future. The quiet woman from the gas station was gone. Captain Hammer Santos was back, and this time she wasn't hiding from anyone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.